Hi, I'm Abby, and today I am here to talk to you about going from an app idea to an app design when you know absolutely nothing about design. There is a blog version of this with all this information and more, so don't feel like you have to take notes. So let's get started. Let's talk about our goals. The first one is, looks like you thought about it. Note, I'm not saying we're going to build the most beautiful website ever, the most perfect website ever, a designer quality website. I'm saying if a user goes to your website and looks at it and goes, they thought about colors. That's it. That's the bar. We've succeeded. Next is reducing decision fatigue. There are a ton of decisions that go into building even the most simple of websites. You don't need to be thinking about where the box goes on the page while you're trying to put it on the page. So if we think about these things ahead of time, that reduces the amount of decisions you're having to make while you're coding, which makes coding easier. The next is uniformity. So if I have 6 buttons on the page, I don't want to repeat myself in the code. I want to have one class, but I do want to repeat myself in the design. So every single button should have that class. This also means if I go to add a 7th button to the page, I don't have to think about it. I add that class to it. We're reducing decision fatigue, and it looks like we thought about it. It'll look cleaner. Uniformity. Finally, minimizing accessibility issues. Even beyond colors, a simple design can help reduce accessibility issues, and a thoughtful design doesn't introduce new ones. So where do we start? If you have absolutely no idea what you want your website to look like, look at some inspiration. I have 5 links here. They're like galleries of websites and designers' beautiful dreams for websites, right? The reason I say that is because they may not be working prototypes. They may not even be possible to code that way. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these. Don't expect yourself to create a website that looks exactly like one that one of these designers made, and stop as soon as you start to feel overwhelmed. You can also Google the specific project you're working on and inspiration, and you'll often get listicles. I Googled web developer portfolio inspiration. I got these 3 links. The first one has 15 web developer portfolios. They're live. You can go and click through them. They're gorgeous. And this person has explained why they like them. So that'll give you lots of ideas. But most importantly, make it your own. I'm the kind of person that adds Shiba Inu illustrations to my personal developer portfolio. I'm not a designer is a great excuse to get away with a lot. So where do we start? Layout. Reach for a program that you already know how to use. I'm talking Google Docs, PowerPoint, Keynote, Word, anything where you know where the button to make a box is already. I'm going to be showing you Keynote slides for my design throughout this entire presentation. The best place to start is your sectioning HTML. If you have no idea what I mean, there's a blog linked here that'll explain everything about semantic HTML, and there's a whole section on sectioning HTML. So what I mean in practice is you're probably going to need a header, you're probably going to need a footer, and then you're going to have a section of main content in between. That's already 3 boxes on our page, and now you're not staring at a blank page anymore. You're already starting your layout. So here's my beautiful Keynote slide for a page that will hopefully go in my digital garden sometime soon. And there are a couple things that I want to point out about this. The first is I'm trying to repeat boxes throughout the page. So you see these 4 horizontal boxes with content are exactly the same. I know that I can use a reusable component and the same classes once, build those once, and then use them 4 times. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking for to reduce our styling work. The other thing is this is the same font in the same color throughout the page. The only thing I'm changing are the font weight and the font size. You can see even with just that, the content is broken up, your eye is moving around the page, and I didn't have to go above and beyond to make that happen. So next, we're going to talk about colors. And by colors, I mean grays. You're going to pick 3 grays. One's going to be your background color, one's going to be your main content color, the next one's going to be your accent color. And what that looks like on my Keynote is this. You can see my darkest color is my accent color. The contrast is high on the color that I have it on top of. You can see those buttons. Immediately, you know those buttons are there and you can click them. The next darkest color is my background color because that will make my lightest color, my main content color, pop. So from here, this is already starting to look like a web page. And now we can pick our non-gray colors. If you enjoy looking at colors, the first 3 links here will spit out accessible colors for you. automatically. The fun part for me is usually looking at all the colors and picking colors. So I like to go to coolers.co. It's made by a web developer. You can copy the hex code and then put it right in your web AIM contrast checker to make sure that you have sufficient contrast. If the idea of picking colors sounds painful to you, but you like math, it's the opposite of me, you can do color math. The first link here is how to use math to pick colors that go well together. The second link is literally use math to make colors. Math, not color-based. If both of those things sound very painful to you, you can keep your grayscale. You just have to make sure that it has sufficient contrast and not too high of contrast. So don't use black and white. Keynote defaults to gray on white. I had to change the color of the text to get black on white. The reason for that is I've been talking about sufficient contrast with my colors up until now, right? So if I have one color on top of another, they're not too close together, you'll be able to read the text. But black and white is all the way at the other end of the spectrum. It is the highest possible contrast. Your user's eyes will be strained. You've probably noticed this on a website before where you're like, do I need to turn down the brightness on my screen? Like, what is happening? My eyes hurt. So if you do absolutely nothing else, if this is the only thing you take away from this presentation, use gray on off-white. It doesn't hurt your eyes, and users will be like, hey, they thought about this. Next up is typography. You can get away with using the default font. You don't have to change the font at all. People will notice if you use 5 fonts. People make fun of designers for this. You don't need to do anything here if you don't want to. What you can do with exactly one font is what we were talking about when I first showed you my keynote slide. You'll see the biggest, highest contrast font first, and then you will see smaller, lower contrast font after that. So just with size, weight, and color, you can do a lot and make your page look very varied, all with the same font. There are some other typography considerations we need to talk about. I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. There are going to be more links if you have any questions, because this is covering a lot in a very little amount of time. The first thing is legibility. This is talking about your stroke weight, your character height and width, and your open counters. Counters are the things like in the C, the negative space, where it doesn't close, because that would be an O. The more open those are, the easier it is for people to read. You want your font to be readable. So you want space between your lines. You don't want to use all caps, and you want to use a text size that people can see. So don't smoosh all your font into the corner of the page really tight together and in all caps. We're web developers, so we want to use responsive font sizes. And when we go for font families, we want one with a sufficient amount of styles. So like Google Fonts allows you to filter by the number of styles. You don't just want bold and normal weight, and that's it. You want to give yourself plenty of options to reach for within that one font. So here are 4 links to read more about this. The first one is literally the code, how to do responsive typography in CSS 3 different ways. The second one is Josh W. Cameau's reference material for accessibility with fonts. It is a deep dive. It is a reference material I reach for often. He talks about all the different units that you can use in CSS for font size and when you should use them and why. It is fantastic. The other 2 are going more into readability and legibility, because really I covered a lot of topics really fast. So if you're interested in that at all, please do go read more. But we're still talking about colors. So I usually end up with a darker color for my font on my light backgrounds, like that main content color that I was showing in the grays. And then I also have a lighter one for darker colors, like my accent color with those buttons. And then I check contrast on all 3 colors. If you can find one font color that has sufficient contrast and not too high contrast on all of your colors, more power to you. I just usually end up with 2. And then I take notes on which font colors work on which background colors. So put it all together, that looks like this. We're already looking like a web page. Now I know what I'm aiming for, and it's going to be a lot easier to put it all together. Before we get there, I want to talk about 2 more things. First is buttons. There's a blog link here to the code for all these buttons I'm going to show you. I'm pretty sure the second one might have some accessibility issues color-wise. Don't hate me. I made them like 2 years ago. But the point is, you can divide your buttons into 3 categories. The first one is primary. These are your call to action buttons, right? If I'm on a login form, my login button better be super findable. I better be like, there it is. I don't need to hunt for it. I don't want to look for it for any amount of time. I want to be able to find this button. That's my primary. It looks like a button. It's right there. But say I'm on that, or say I'm on a registration form and I already have a login. I want to be able to find the login button. That's going to be my secondary type button, but it's not going to be as findable as the register button, right? So secondary buttons are for actions that you are like maybe sometimes going to want to find, but it's not the reason you're on the page. Those are our primary buttons. Finally, we have tertiary buttons. They're often styled like links. And here I have my login form. My tertiary buttons are for actions that users are probably not on the page for and are probably rarely going to need. Hopefully, I'm not forgetting my password every time I go to log into the site, right? But I can still find it. It's just not the first thing my eye goes to. My first thing my eye goes to is my primary button. Second thing is my secondary button. And then finally, my tertiaries. So where buttons were for actions, links are for taking you somewhere. And this is another one where you can just leave them alone. You don't have to do anything. I know people complain about the focus outline for buttons and links, but you can have the underline. No, it's not a problem. If you do change the underline, you're going to have to think a lot about it. You need to keep accessibility in mind and apply it to every link on the page. I have a link here to accessibility for links because there's a lot to cover. And in CSS, you have 4 link states. One is link. It's just on the page. You haven't interacted with it at all. Second is visited. You've already clicked it. You've already gone somewhere. Third is hover. So your mouse is moving over it. And the fourth is active. So you're actively clicking on it. You have to put them in your style sheet in this order or they'll start overriding each other and you'll get behaviors that you weren't expecting. Unlike buttons, you can use the pointer cursor, so the little hand with the finger out on your links so people know that they're links when you hover over them. So finally, let's talk about putting it all together. We've made this beautiful keynote that I've been showing you throughout this entire presentation. And thinking about it, we've already talked about where I'm repeating boxes across the page. We've got our horizontal boxes 4 times. We've got our buttons. And I know that this is not the only page I'm going to want to make. So my header is going to be on every page on my site. So I'm going to reuse that. So any of the boxes that repeat are bite-sized projects. You can go as small as a button. I like to choose a box that I'm going to be using a lot, like my header, that has other things in it. So to make my header, I'm already going to have to do my colors. I'm going to have to probably do some button styling. And then I've already made those styles when I go to do the rest of the page. The whole point of this is breaking it down so we know where to start. We know that we can build off of it, and we know that we can reuse it. So to that point, let's talk about making reusable styling you can build upon. You want to make your styling so straightforward to you that you can come back 6 months from now and add a feature and use that styling without having to think about it. So let's say I'm building a portfolio. I know I'm going to want a section for each project that looks the same. And within that project section, I'm going to want a screenshot, a link to the GitHub repo, a link to the website, a description, and a little heading. So I'm going to build that. And within each of those, I'm going to have variables like for my darker text color, I'm going to name that dark text. I'm going to have classes for my buttons. I'm going to name that button. Like I want to be able to come back and read it immediately without having to think about it. I will take those notes that I made on contrast and put them in my CSS file right next to where I'm defining my color variables. I keep calling them variables. They're CSS custom properties. I have a link here for the MDN explanation of that. But basically, instead of having to use a hex code every time, you can just say, oh, put dark text here. Pretty simple. I've also got the Mozilla Developer Network guide to organizing your CSS here. I use BEM typically for naming my classes. That's block element modifier. And that's just a way that I know looking at it like, oh, if I have button and then # primary, that's for my primary buttons. It's just a guide to follow, a style guide. That guide has many more naming conventions. It has selectors to use that will make your life easier. It has how to break up your CSS. It's all about making it as easy as possible for you to come back to. And for now, while you're building it, slap those boxes in a grid. I have the CSS Tricks CSS Grid guide. They call it a guide. I call it a Bible. It has everything you need to know about CSS Grid. And at this point, it's plug and play. We've got our developer tools where you can click a little button and get all the grid outline on your page. We have sugar syntax where you can, in English, be like, this is named header. Put header here. It is the time to use CSS Grid. And if we're talking about building a portfolio, I've got all my project content plugged into my reusable project component and styles that I built. I put that in a CSS Grid container. My main content is done. Like, we are good to go. We love CSS Grid. Finally, a website is never finished. So if you are like, oh, there's so much more I could do with this design, there's so much I could do with this website, that's great. You want to keep building. It's an iterative process. It's never done. So you can always redesign, you can always add, and you should blog about every time you do. Take it from me. I've got blogs on accessibility auditing. I've got blogs on refactoring a dark mode toggle on my website. I've got we have 3 blogs on it because I refactored it twice. So please do share what you're doing. Please let me know if this was helpful, because that's all I got. My coworker who has a degree in design said that if this piqued your interest in design at all, if you want to know more about the concepts and why I'm telling you to do things, you can get the Non-Designer's Design book. She used that during her degree. And then this is a link to the blog version. Thank you very much.